Hello and welcome to a very special live session of the ET Money Ask the Expert series. Today, we are joined by Mr. Kalpen Parekh, President, DSP Mutual Fund. They say to err or make mistakes is human, be it in personal life or professional. We all have taken decisions we wish we hadn't made. This holds true when it comes to investing as well. From taking investment decisions based on what everyone else is doing to letting our emotions control what we do in a falling market, the list is quite long. And it's not only regular investors like you and me that make these mistakes. Some of these have been made by Kalpain too. And in this session, we'll talk to him about the mistakes he has made, understand what rule book or framework he follows now to avoid repeating these mistakes, and how everyone can benefit from those rule book. Kalpain, thank you for taking out time and doing this.
Thanks, Rajat, and thanks to the team at ET Money for inviting me.
So let's jump in. So let's begin the first mistake, Kalpain, that's on your list that you think you have done and investors also do.
So let me not, think about mistakes investors make, because this journey of investing is always a personal journey, and we end up preaching a lot at times to investors without realizing their realities and their challenges. So I'll focus largely on me and go inside in terms of my own experiences. And the first mistake is actually not realizing that markets have cycles, not realizing that markets fluctuate. Everything in life is seasonal and cyclical. We have to learn from nature that there are seasons every 3-4 months. They keep changing, and when seasons change, we have to adapt. So nature adapts, human beings adapt as per season. We change the way we live to some extent. We change the nature of food we eat. But in investing, we actually, the biggest learning for me is that we extrapolate the recent good times into the future forever, or we extrapolate the recent bad times in future forever. So the biggest learning for me is to recognize that asset classes have cycles and they fluctuate. What I mean by fluctuate is they go up and they go down. So when they are down, don't assume they'll go down forever. When they are up, don't assume they'll go up forever. They will have their phases of ups and downs. And as investor, I need to be ready for that. I need to be prepared for that. I cannot avoid them. There is no way, unlike seasons where it is very well defined as per the calendar that these are the 3 seasons, 3 months of summer, and then 4 months of rain, then 4 months of winter, which come in specific months. In markets, they don't come as per a calendar, so it's more challenging or difficult to time them. But knowing that they will fluctuate helps a lot. And I start by my first experience. I joined the industry in 99, 2000, and that was a phase when themes. In every cycle, themes are popular, either on the upside or the downside. So the theme that was most popular in 99, 2000 was the tech bubble. India, the whole world was transitioning in this new problem called Y2K. That once the world crosses over from 1999 to 2000, how will the entire world really transition out? And technology was booming world over. It was the era of the beginning of internet, and dot coms and eyeballs, and these were dot coms and eyeballs. These were the most popular buzzwords. So technology stocks were doing very well. As fund houses, we brought technology funds, thematic funds to the market, and you end up investing aggressively in those thematic funds, because the last 1 year return looks very good, 70, 80, 90% returns. So when you have to make an investment decision between 5 different types of funds, one is a simple diversified fund versus a thematic fund, which is doing extremely well at this point in time. The bias is towards getting carried away with the fund which is doing very well and investing a lot more, in fact, everything in that fund. So that was my first mistake. Thankfully, it was in the first year of my career, so the salary that I would have earned, of course, it was very precious then also. But in the overall scheme of things, it's always good to learn fast, good to learn early. So the error that I made was buying past high returns and extrapolating that theory forever in the future and assuming that will do well. And then within the next year or two, we had the collapse of the tech bubble. And the biggest learning was that nothing can sustain high growth rates of 80-90% for too long. The capitalistic world ensures competition comes in and growth rates slow down. But when markets extrapolate very high growth rate into the future, stock prices get drunk, and they also go crazy through the roof. As investors, we should not get drunk. As investors, we should become more disciplined and reallocate portfolios or diversify portfolios. So I think that was my first big learning almost 20 years back now.
Now, how as investors, can be ready for this? Are there tools available for them from the mutual fund industry to help them be prepared for, these changing cycles and to be ready?
So, of course, it's a good question. Tools aren't yet available to guide investors around these cycles because, like I said, they don't operate with precision. So, when cycles are not operating with precision, typically tools will always have some precision, and hence that creates a mismatch or an illusion that we have an answer to predicting these cycles. So, prediction of cycles is very difficult. Sometimes the cycles are very, very long drawn. You take gold as an asset class, for 10 years it goes up, and then for 15, 20 years it goes nowhere. Commodities have such very long cycles. Take Japan as a country, 30, 40 years of low returns after 10 years of superior returns. So how do you predict? Like in US, the phase of low returns lasted for 10 years, but in Japan it lasted for 30, 40 years. So a student of markets, how does he really know which country, which cycle, which asset class will have what tenor? So it's not a perfect science. So that's a very important learning to have as investors, that we will never get precision like you have in rocket science, that you want to send a satellite from here to the moon and it will land with precision. Investing is in a way like medical profession, where you keep experimenting, you go with your experience and judgment. So the first and the foremost toolkit is the toolkit of judgment and experience and of learning. There is no replacement to that. I can't give you a ready-made answer that you take this pill and all your cycle predictions will happen. Having said that, there are broad indicators, and at DSP we are working on that. We're working on something called as the advisor ruler, which will try and give the broad range of extremes of the market of the two main asset classes, which is equity and fixed income, and they will indicate where are we in the whole cycle, and accordingly, basis that indication, you can decide the percentage exposure towards an asset class. So to give you a simple example of that framework, bit simplistic, but take it for the time being. Take equity as an asset class. One way to measure the attractiveness of equity as an asset class is to look at its price. What price are we paying to buy the asset class? So the grandmother's wisdom: if we overpay for an asset class, then the future returns will be lower. If we buy any asset class cheaper than its fair value, then obviously the future returns will be better. It's a very simple thumb rule for any asset class. So how do you measure the attractiveness of equity as an asset class? It's a concept called as earnings yield or price to earning multiple. So if the price to earning multiple of equity today is 30 times, effectively its earnings yield is 100 divided by 30, so 3.3. Now compare that to earnings yield of a very safe instrument, which is fixed deposits or fixed income or bonds. Bonds earn around 6% today. So between the two asset classes, equity earns 3.5 with another 1.5% of dividends, so roughly 5, and bonds earn around 6. So between the two asset classes, relatively bonds are more attractive. Now I can say that, okay, yeah, but bonds don't have growth in them. They will give you the same 6% return every year, but equity does have growth. So this 5% earnings yield should be seen as slightly more, because it will eventually have some amount of growth also. But still, bonds are better priced than equity. So I would say that in my personal portfolio, I would like to keep more bonds or reasonable amount of bonds right now. So if I have new money to invest, my salary came day before yesterday, I would like to have adequate cushion by having bonds in the portfolio and not be completely in equity. And then you look at historically, whenever valuations have been at 30 times, the next 3 to 5 year returns of equity has been more volatile, and the returns have been very close to what returns fixed income as an asset class gives. So if you're going to earn same as closer to fixed income return with very high degrees of fluctuation, then you might as well add more fixed income at that point in time in the portfolio. Or instead of buying an equity fund or investing in an equity fund, I would invest in an asset allocation fund or an equity and bond fund, which already has a 30-40% embedded cushion of bonds. in the portfolio. And in the future, when markets are more volatile, the bond component can not only reduce fluctuations but can be reallocated back to equity. Go to the other extreme in bear markets, the lowest valuation for equity goes as low as 12, 13 times. 100 divided by 12 or 13 will give you around 8%, 8 to 9% earnings yield. Now, when equity gives you 8-9% earnings yield plus another 2% dividend yield, that's 11%, plus inherent growth, versus that bonds give you 7 or 8%, then this is very attractive. At that time, you sell everything and allocate more towards equity. So these are the two extremes, and in the real world, markets don't operate in extremes; they operate all through the timelines, and at different points in time, they operate in different timelines. So my approach would be that while you are in the middle, and the middle is a long phase of time, stick to your long-term asset allocation. If long-term asset allocation is 70% in equity, you stick to that. But when you go towards extreme, equity goes to 30 times or equity goes to 10, 11 times, is once in 6-7 years when that happens, don't get carried away. So at 30 times, the past returns look very good, and we are tempted to put more money in equity as an asset class. So that is the time to be more cautious and guard yourself. Likewise, the same approach works for fixed income. Particularly in India, interest rates have a time range of 5% on the lower side and 9% on the higher side. So when rates are very low, I would invest less in bonds, and when rates are very high, I will invest more in bonds. So these are two very simplistic thumb rules to evaluate, is there margin of safety in our investing. These thumb rules don't guarantee that, if you invest basis the thumb rule in equity, it takes away the volatility of equity. I have no magical answer to that. It will only ensure that you don't lose significant capital, and over a longer period of time, you make more returns. So that's the advantage of having these thumb rules. And there are other very intuitive thumb rules, like if an asset class is very popular, everyone in the world is wanting to invest in that asset class, it most often will be towards the higher range of its valuation, because when everyone chases an asset class, its price goes up, it becomes very popular. And in investing, the herds rarely make money over a long period of time. They may make money in the short term, but over a long period of time, only when you are away from the herd can you make better returns than the rest of the market. So the thumb rule is to not chase what is most popular. Keep your eyes and ears open. Read a lot. Read about risk more than returns. In old times, I remember I used to look for which funds have given the best return, which asset class has given the best return. Over time, I have rewired my mind to read about which asset class has more risk today. Where can things go wrong? So I think as an investor, if we can make that switch in our mind to look for risk and understand risk before we put our hard-earned money, that what can go wrong. I also look at past 5 years returns or past 3 year returns, and if the returns are unusually high, that again is a warning signal. So to give you an example again, long-term return of equity, for example, in India has been around 13% CAGR. And if currently the last 3 year, 5 year returns is at 38, 40%, then you should ask a question that an asset class where I deserve to earn 13% return is giving me 30% return, then something is unlikely. Something is likely to change, and for that 30 to normalize to 13, it would mean the next few years the returns will be subdued. So these are some intuitive principles that we should be aware of while making our investment decisions.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Kalpen, for a detailed answer on what investors can do. So let's move to the second mistake that you made an investor. What did you do, and what do you do now to avoid that mistake?
So the second mistake is to panic when things are bad and run away from that asset class. Because let me explain it differently. What happens is that when markets are rising, I would love to seek returns, and when an asset class or markets or my past returns are falling, we start thinking about risk. That is a big mistake we make. On both the sides we go wrong. So this is my first mistake, where I said don't get very optimistic when markets are rising. The corollary to that is don't get very pessimistic when markets are falling. So, Ben Graham says that falling prices means actually falling risk, not rising risk. Intuitively, if you ask anyone that if your NAVs are falling, is this fund more risky or less risky? And most often the answer will be more risky. But once a lot of price correction has happened, the risk has gone out of the asset class. Of course, provided the asset class has to be good. The starting, one very basic assumption in everything that I'm talking to you is the underlying asset class is a good asset class. It means good companies, good businesses, good equity stocks, good funds, good bonds. That is intact, and then everything else is an overlay on that. So the second mistake for me was that when you saw NAVs falling by 70 or 80% because of temporary reversion to mean, you feel that now this asset class is bad, so let me chase the next asset class. So go back to the example of 2000 when the tech bubble burst. First of all, tech stocks fell by 70-80%. Then we had the equity cycle slowing down for 3-4 years. The economy was going through a slowdown, and Indian markets for 4 years were almost gave absolute negative 40% return. I remember Sensex was 6,000 in the year 2000. It went all the way down to 2,800, so dropped by 50% on an absolute basis over a period of 3 years. Those 3 years, remember, we are in markets every day. We are watching NAVs every day. We are talking about investing every day. So our mind is getting more and more bombarded by noise and negativity that this asset class is bad, nothing's going to change and stuff like that. And as more and more time progresses, the asset class becomes cheaper and cheaper and more attractive. But the second mistake is to say that, okay, no, this is not the best asset class. Let me not touch equity forever because it never makes money. Because, at that time, you've not seen long history, 3 years or 4 years of experience in the industry. We've not even read the books of investing, and we start taking decisions. And let's say when an economy slows down, interest rates come down. When interest rates come down, bond prices go up. So NAVs of bond funds go up. So I remember in 2003 and 4, income funds and bond fund NAVs would rise by 14, 15, 16% every year for the last 1 or 2 or 3 years, whereas equity was negative. So what was intuitively easy to do? What was easy to do is to jump or discard equities and be in love with fixed income and say that, if bonds can give me 18% versus equities minus 50%, why should I be in equities? But, the biggest mistake was to look at the past returns for both the asset classes and assume again that they will continue in the future and invest more in bonds and not at all in equities. And actually, that was the second error. You compound your mistake. The first mistake you make is, buy something at a high. And the second mistake you make is not buy the same asset class at a low when it's giving you a chance to correct your mistake. So I remember in 2003-4, a lot of money, was in gilt funds. Thankfully, my father forced me to, buy a home at that point in time, a very small house. I was just about to get married. And he said, you need to have a house. So whatever investment you have, you sell it. And thankfully, he made me forcibly sell the debt funds. But otherwise, when that cycle reversed, interest rates went up, even the debt fund returns come down. So, and then 2003 to 2007 was the mother of bull run we've never seen in India. In 4 years, Nifty went up 7 times, small cap went up 15 times, mid caps went up 10 times. So that was the type of return that, I partly lost out by not being in equity at the beginning of the cycle. Because at the beginning of the cycle, I was looking at the end of the last cycle, but not able to imagine that when the last cycle ends, the next cycle would have started. It's start at some point in time. I should not be underweight equity. So that was my second mistake of not correcting the first mistake and not investing in an asset class which is at a 5-year low.
Sure. So now, when you mentioned about this mistake, how have you aligned your investment behavior now, to avoid this mistake?
So I think the first thing I've done is I've stopped reacting to periodic news flows. I've stopped reacting to day-to-day stimulus, even though my job is such that the inflow in the the amount of information and data and noise is infinite, right from the time you wake up to the time you sleep. So the idea is that become an observer to data, don't react to every data point. So, for example, yesterday the data point of GDP falling 24% was a data point which should create some panic, because never in the history of our investing careers would we have seen an event like this. But the learning is to not react to data and to realize that if I know the data, the market already knows it and the entire market knows it, which means it is already captured in the price. So not reacting to information is very important because by the time you react, you're always almost late, or you're always late, because stock prices, bond prices are aware of that information, unless that is completely new information. So everyone knew that this quarter's GDP is going to be a washout, and to some extent there was adjustments in estimations and expectations. So not reacting to every data point is a big learning for me. Number two, having some anchors of investing. So the other anchor is diversify a portfolio across multiple asset classes. So I have investments in I invest everything in mutual funds. You're aware of that. As a part of DSP, we are we deliberately invest only in our mutual fund, whether debt, equity, gold, international, all of them. And there's a wide range which is available. So my biggest learning over time now is to diversify and genuinely diversify. Diversification, most people don't realize. They feel that if I've invested in 10 equity funds, that's diversification. Actually, not so, because the asset class is still the same. It is still equity. If you invested in 100 stocks, it's not diversification because the underlying asset class is still the same. Diversification is investing in 4 different styles, which will work differently. So when one asset class works, the other may not work, and the third may work, and the fourth may not work. So these are 4 asset classes which have poor correlation with each other. They don't move together. So it's like a cricket team where if I'm coming from old days, so my icons were people like Sachin Tendulkar or Kapil Dev. If I used to love Kapil Dev because of his great bowling, I will not select a team with 11 of him. If I used to be a fan of Sachin Tendulkar and his technique of batting, I will not have 11 players who are Sachin Tendulkar. I will diversify and have a spinner. I'll have 2 spinners, 3 fast bowlers, 1 wicket keeper, 1 all-rounder, and 4 batsmen. So in investing, the diversification is across stocks, bonds, gold, and global stocks. As an Indian investor, 100% of our income is from the Indian economy and how our businesses and companies do well. But in our investing, we don't need to be really patriotic to only put all the money back in the Indian stocks. So I diversify across Indian equity funds, some global equity funds, some bit of gold, and some bit of Indian fixed income. So these are the 4 asset classes. So to start with, at no point in time, I will have all money in one asset class because then I'm taking huge risk on only one asset class. So diversification is the way to avoid reacting to stimulus on any particular asset class, because one asset class will do badly, but the other one will do well and create overall balance in my portfolio. So diversifying across these 4 asset classes is my first anchor, that at any point in time, portfolio should have these 4. The degree of exposure to each of them is a personal choice, is a choice based on some of my personal rules. And I stick to my rules. In investing, many times we look up to other people's rules. Our context is very different than, let's say my context is very different than yours. If I start following your rules blindly or you start following my rules blindly, again, recipe for some bit of accidents. So we have to learn over time and write down our mistakes and then say these are my rules. So my rules are diversify widely, diversify loosely, so that asset classes don't have great relationships with each other, and also have some bit of underperforming asset class in my portfolio today, because going back to first principle that performance will fluctuate, what is underperforming today will eventually again start doing better or outperforming. So that's my way of keeping myself protected from daily noise of news flow or noise of changes in prices. Prices are bound to fluctuate every minute. Why do I need to react? My money is for 20 years. My money is for 40 years. Some money might pass on to the next generation. I'm not going to lose everything. So why do I need to react with what's happening today? So switching off is a very, very important ability to develop to keep our portfolios steady and less volatile.
Okay, thanks, Kalpen, for the detailed, for the second mistake that you spoke about and how do you avoid it. So moving on to the next mistake, if you could talk about, what was the third biggest mistake or the third mistake on your list, what you did and what you do now to avoid it.
See, another important area where we go wrong is to not have frameworks or rules or anchors, and have a lot of randomness in our decision making. So to give you an example, when we make an investment in an equity fund or a debt fund, we never ask this question: what are the drivers of returns for this fund, or what can go wrong in this fund? How is this fund being managed? We only look at one data point, that what is this fund's return in the last 5 years or last 1 year. And if the return is good, we assume that the fund is good. Good returns doesn't mean it's a good fund. Or good past returns doesn't mean the future returns will be as good. They will keep fluctuating. So it's important to have anchors. Now, to give you an example, I'll give you a personal example. When I was joining DSP in the year 2017, and that was a phase when our small cap fund was at the peak of charts. It was rated as perhaps the best fund in the world at that point in time, because the last 4-year returns were 40%. Now, there were two reasons for the fund to have done well. The fund itself was good, great investment principles, great risk management, but the cycle was extremely favorable for small caps, and small caps were really shooting through the roof, and a bubble was getting created. So when I asked everyone what is the best fund to invest in, obviously the answer was the small cap fund, because all data was in favor of small cap. The second question, which is a fund which is not doing well, the answer was DSP Equity Fund, and it is still a very underrated, not so popular fund of DSP as of now, so far, but it's one of our oldest funds. So the two important stimulus was the crowd's opinion was invest in small cap, and the crowd's opinion was don't invest in the equity fund. Equity fund was a multi-cap fund, so obviously returns would not be as strong as the small cap at that point in time. So that here is where my next learning, which happened over time, is the learning of having investment frameworks. That what are the investment rules that the portfolio manager really looks at. So when I was meeting the entire team, and I was meeting one after the other all portfolio managers, I spent a lot of time with each portfolio manager, and I spent a lot of time with Atul Bole, for example, who is the portfolio manager for the multi-cap fund, and he gave me his rules. He wrote down that or he highlighted to me that these are my do's and don'ts. And I as a portfolio manager don't really react a lot when my current portfolio underperforms, as long as my portfolio is coming out of a framework. So learning what is that framework. So that framework said that my preference is always for long-term compounding business models, or businesses which don't need a lot of capital, or businesses which don't take a lot of leverage, or businesses which are not very large in terms of the number of companies and the number of subsidiaries they have, or they are not in 100 different businesses. And hence they become very complex to analyze. Now this is a philosophy that resonated with me. That okay, this makes a lot of sense to me. But the flip side of this philosophy is that when there is a massive bull run in the market, like 2017 was, this type of portfolios would underperform. But what is the mistake that I would have made in the past was to say that this fund's past returns or current returns are not looking good. Let me not invest.
Sharvil, thank you so much for the detailed answer. Now, you mentioned about understanding frameworks and understanding why a fund is doing well or not doing well, and then taking a decision. But you could do it because you're part of the industry and you're there within the fund house. How do normal investors get this kind of information? Because we don't see fund managers coming on in front of retail investors and telling them this is the reason my fund is doing well, or this is the reason my fund is not doing well, and why you should or should not invest right now. So how do retail investors, normal investors, avoid this habit of going with the the 5-star fund or the flavor of the season, without having the information that you would have being part of the mutual fund industry?
So let me put myself in the hat of a common investor and assume I am not a part of the fund industry. Would I still have been able to do this or not? I have again over a period of time, learning from a lot of other wise investors and my own mistakes and a lot of separate reading I do out of my own interest. I realized that someone very, very senior told me once when I asked him this question, that tell me which is the best fund to invest. And he said that aisa kuch nahi hota hai. There is no best fund to invest. The question to ask is, are you the best investor for this fund? So again, it's all about going inside and asking yourself that do you have the right behavior and the right attitudes and the right temperament to really be the best investor or be a good investor. So when we go and search on Google, give me the best funds, or we go to a mutual fund website and look for the best performing funds, actually it's the most futile exercise. I wish we could have on our website a section saying that not the best performing mutual funds, and then start the dialogue. So this question poses a thought to me for what I should be doing separately. But other than that, I think few mutual funds very clearly articulate their ideologies. in a written format. They articulate their ideologies in videos, in press interviews, in television interviews and stuff like that. So if you are an investor who's really seeking information, ask yourself what is the right information to seek. Ask yourself or learn for yourself what are the right questions to ask. Because only when we ask the right questions will we get the right answers. अगर हमारे सवाल ही गलत है तो उसका अच्छा जवाब भी गलत ही होगा, because सवाल गलत है. So to ask someone that, what's your view on the market is the most futile question to ever ask. And that is what we tend to, focus a lot of time on, because, no one knows what the future is. But to ask a question that, we all know that the markets are uncertain. How do you navigate through uncertainty? How do you build your portfolio? What are your likes and dislikes? What type of companies will you never invest in? What can go wrong in your hypothesis? Show me that, last time when you predicted something, did your portfolio do well or not do well? So these are the things to look for when you are, either trying to, talk to someone, whether you're advisor or even you're a fund manager. It's not just the fund manager, it could be the advisor also. And then, look for, even if you have to look on Google, don't look for the best performing, scheme from DSP. Instead, type investment philosophy document of DSP. That will add a lot more value to your life as customers and investors than seeking the best performing fund, because the best performing fund will always be seasonal, and left to ourselves, we will buy it at the peak of its season. So like on our website, we have documented our investment philosophy, whether for our fixed income fund or for our equity fund. We've written down that this fund will have these do's and don'ts. These were the mistakes the fund manager has made. This is when our view went wrong. This is the way we have made corrections. So let's say if I have to invest and I'm not only wearing DSP hat, I look for a few fund houses or a few fund managers or CEOs or CIOs who are not just glamorizing the product, but who are also in a way underselling the product, who are appreciating risk a lot more, who are giving a very balanced perspective that what can go right and what can go wrong. I don't tend to buy rosy theories all the time that invest, fill it, forget it, shut it, your money is made. It is never made that way. There are periods of time when risk has to be appreciated. So whoever helps you appreciate risks, appreciate what can go wrong, and give you that inputs. And I think many fund houses have started documenting their investment philosophy. We are one of them. There are a couple of other portfolio managers. And I can only, through your medium, tell investors that India is blessed to have great talent in the money management industry. We just have to also learn how to pick up the best from each, and not get swayed by just data on performance, data on returns. I was talking to my yoga teacher yesterday, who said that I've started investing on my own now in the last 4 months of lockdown, and this is my portfolio. And when she sent the portfolio to me, I was a bit unhappy that it didn't have any DSP funds. So, a lot of work for us to do. But when I asked her what was the choice of your fund selection, and of course the answer was that I went to the website, I looked for their returns, and I also searched for the best performing funds. And these are the 5 funds which are the best performing funds. So this is classical, behavior that we demonstrate and mistakes that we make. So I think it's a collective, responsibility for all of us as part of the ecosystem. Mutual funds have to spend a lot more time talking of frameworks, talking of mistakes. Partners like you have to do that. I'm thankful to you that you're doing a session on my mistakes and not a session on my predictions for the future, because my mistakes are real, my predictions, who knows. And likewise, over time with this type of content, investors will also learn to ask right questions. And, we should continue to do more of these conversations.
All right. So, Kalpen, and moving on to the, a fourth mistake on your list, what would that be? And again, how do you, now avoid making that mistake?
Okay. So, I think the other error, like I said, is this, home country bias, or to get carried away with narratives and not numbers. So let me, illustrate this with a story. To break the control that stories have over our minds, I will use a story to break that myth. So this is a story about, some, war done in the Middle Eastern countries around 3,300 years back. It was called the Battle of Canaan, and in that battle, the king of Israel was attacking the country of Iraq in those days, and he was on the verge of winning the war, but the sun was about to set, and he knew that if he finishes the battle that day itself before the sun sets, he will go home victorious. But if the sun sets and as per rules you don't fight after the sunset, then you have to start again. The enemy battles will get time to recoup, re-strategize, and mount an attack again, and his chance should dip. So he was very keen that the sun actually, does not set. So he looks into the eye of the sun, and he instructs the sun that, I want you to pause right now and not set. And the sun just pauses and freezes there for a couple of hours, and he finishes his last assault, and he wins the battle, and he comes back home victorious and a hero. And his stories are a part of folklore now. When schools, teach about history, this is one of the most prominent story about the king's courage. Now, this is a nice story which has crossed 3,000 years and hundreds of generations. At the same time, if one of the kids who's reading this story also has a scientific bent of mind and is reading another magazine called Discover, and Discover is a magazine which talks of a lot of scientific principles, laws of nature, biology, physics, and all of that. There was an article in that magazine which said that exactly on that date when the Battle of Canaan was fought, exactly at that place and exactly at that time, there was a solar eclipse which had happened. It was not the king who with his power could stop the movement of the sun, as everyone believed, but it was just the phenomenon of nature of a solar eclipse. So a rational mind will look for science. An emotional mind will look for story. In relationships, in many things in life, emotions are extremely important. Our EQ is very important. In investing, I would say that curb the instincts to get carried away by stories, and curb the instinct to put money just behind stories. Right? Ask for evidence behind the stories. Ask for data behind the narratives and the labels. So I'll give you a couple of labels which have made me make my mistakes. So I give you the example of the 2000 tech boom. When the story is doing the round was that Indian companies will become the largest software companies in the world. Indian companies will rule NASDAQ. Now 20 years have passed. I still don't see any Indian company having reached there, but I ended up putting my heart and money and learned the hard way. The story in 2008 bull run of infrastructure and the bull run of emerging markets was that fastest growing country, India and China, most money will be made in India and China. So China continued to grow at very fast rate. India was the second fastest growing country, but the stock markets actually rewarded America, or it rewarded all the tech giants like the Apples and the Amazons of the world. So the narrative made us put all our money only in emerging markets or only in India, which is our home country bias. So we should be patriots, but in investing, we can give slightly extra weightage to allocating money to a diversified, regional focus, because there are a lot of interesting companies and business models which are available in the rest of the world. Now, the story today, for example, is invest in NASDAQ. Now, will I get carried away with the mistake that I made last time and maybe make another mistake and put everything in NASDAQ today? No, because I am seeing Tesla going through the roof, and I see no reason or logic behind that. That why is Tesla's market cap more than the entire auto sector's market cap, with virtually a very small component of sales. But NASDAQ is getting advantage of some of these big moves. So it's very nice and fashionable today to buy the story of NASDAQ. As an example, I'm not saying don't invest in NASDAQ, but don't go and put all your money now. To say that now that India in the last 10 years has not made money, let me get out of India and put everything in NASDAQ. So start having a slice in some of these global best businesses of the world, but start now knowing the fact that these companies are also now at their lifetime high, their valuations are very high. So apply the rules of valuation again. That on an aggregate basis, is the overall valuation closer to its peak, closer to its bottom, somewhere in between. Today, most of the asset classes have valuations closer to their peak. So I would say that I'll go slow. So I have, for example, we have a very beautiful, fund which invests in global American companies, which is called the US Flexible US Equity Fund. But I don't go and put all my money there now in a hurry. I've started an SIP, so it will build my exposure to that bucket over the next 5 years. And I'm hoping over the next 5 years, all the volatility will play out in American markets. They've had a long stretch of 10 years of virtually very low volatility. and that also cannot last forever. So whenever those markets turn volatile, my SIPs will gradually acquire more units. So I think the another mistake that I want to really speak about is the mistake of putting everything in just one most best performing asset class, best performing country, and getting carried away with narratives. So I'm not buying the narrative of just the global tech or the. So today the narrative is diversified globally, but I will not get carried away in that narrative and put a lot of money. I will do it gradually and take measured steps, because I know that those markets are now at their cycle highs, and Indian markets are at cycle lows. Some part of it is deserving. We are at cycle lows is deserving. Then the next narrative, which is again which creates a trap for us, is the fastest growing country gives the fastest returns. Now, if you look at evidence over the last 60, 70 years, highest GDP growth does not necessarily convert into highest stock price performance. China for 10 years has given no returns in dollar terms. It had the highest growth, because what are the constituents of that growth? What is the quality of that growth? How transparent is that growth? Is that growth coming by taking lots of loans in one cycle, and then in the next cycle those loans blow up, or those companies blow up? These are things which keep changing on a real-time basis. So all I'm saying is learn from the narrative, but demand more data, demand more, ask more questions. Is this narrative already the price? Is the NAV already too high because of the narrative? And don't get carried away. So these are things that I would urge investors: narratives and numbers, keep both, respect both, not only one.
Sure. So, Kelvin, you talked about narratives, and the fact is that if you open news today, the narrative, will be, as you said, diversify globally, invest in, whatever narrative that is. So, how does, as a normal investor, really, move beyond this narrative? Because if you go on Google and search today, you will find the same narrative, right? Because that's what the flavor of the season is. So, how do investors really, avoid falling into trap of that narrative that they're hearing in the news? Looking at Google, or wherever they're reading, be it any magazine or a newspaper. So how do they avoid falling and getting tempted with that narrative and following that?
See, I would first of all urge all investors to read this very beautiful book called The Art of Thinking Clearly.
Okay.
Now, most investment books are very dry and boring, but this is a very interesting book, very, very simple book. In two pages, it explains a lot of these traps that we as investors, fall prey to. And one big learning I had from reading that book is everything that I've told you are my learnings from that book. They have helped me form my own rules. And there's a very simple answer to not fall prey to the narrative. Because how do we fall prey to the narrative? Should I invest in global funds? Instead, let me type a question in Google: why should I not invest in global funds? You will get 5 reasons for that. And then you read both. You read both of them. And then you take a call that, okay, what makes sense or what doesn't make sense. So I would say that, investing is not that easy that you can just blindly put your money and expect to make money. I would also tell investors to take that effort. I would tell them that, if you really want your money to work harder for you, you have to take some effort. We work so hard for acquiring money, but we hardly work to take the right decisions. So search for, counter narratives. Like when I wanted to buy 3 years back, I was, very influenced by one of the cars which I wanted to buy. So I started Googling for it, that, why should I buy this car? So all the, data points were positive. And then I thought, let me apply the counter narrative. So I then typed, why should I not buy this car? And then it gave me some 7 reasons that, when you buy this car, the suspensions have a problem. The finish is not the best. After 2 years, you start getting into these problems. So then I checked with few friends who had completed 2 years. So friends who had that car and had completed only 6 months had great things to say. But those who had completed 2 years actually had those negative things to say, that yes, it has started giving me ABC problem. Yes, suspensions are a problem because of so and so reason. And that helped me, recalibrate my decision. So for every narrative, I think it is our duty as investors to look for counter narratives and look for heroes. Don't look for heroes in, personalities from the fund industry, whether it is DSP and me or anyone for that matter. Remember, all of us are here to sell something. We obviously have to also promote our funds. We attempt to be very responsible, genuinely, to ensure that investors don't make big mistakes. But always don't get carried away by one person's view. Look for 5 people's views. Let there be debate in those views. Ask, like when we want to take any important decision for our health, we consult 3-4 doctors. We ask them that, okay, if should I do this surgery or not? Should I have this line of treatment or not? So have a well-rounded perspective, and don't look for shortcuts. So look for counter narratives. That's the best way to break the narrative.
Let's come to the last, fifth mistake, and which would be on your list of mistakes you've done. And if you just walk us through that mistake and what was your learning, and how do you avoid it now?
Yeah, so I think it's again partly some of it will overlap with some of the mistakes that I highlighted. But I have learned one more thing is that in investing, be an atheist. Don't look for gods. Don't look for star personalities. Don't look for star ratings. Don't look for star fund houses, star fund managers, or star schemes. Try to become a star investor. So it's an extension of what I said in the last few questions. That look for the process behind the portfolio manager, look for his personality, look for his DNA, look for his mistakes in the past, and choose a fund manager because of that, not because of the last 5-year returns. Because a lot of returns also come out of skills. Some returns come out of skills, some come out of luck, some come out of randomness. Now it's very difficult to break that out. Only when you have a 20-30-year history of a certain portfolio manager do you really, can we really say that this will last for longer. And India is still a nascent industry, so very few of us really have that long a history. We are only 25 years old as a company, for example. So my suggestion is to not just look for stars, but look for the process that generates superior returns, and understand the process a lot more. Again, I'll give you an example that I was talking to a very senior private equity consultant a couple of days back who does very successful investments in the private equity world, and he wanted to invest in the listed equity world through mutual fund. And he actually wrote to me that I have noticed your quant fund, it has done very well, I would like to invest, and I've done my own research on it. So I said, fine, tell me, why do you want to invest? Of course, I'll be happy if you invest in my fund, but you being a friend, I want to know why do you want to invest. He said, no, your last 1 year returns are very good. Last 1 year has been volatile, markets are down 2, the fund is up 9, it has beaten Nifty and this and that. So I said, I'm happy that you looked at the performance, but you looked at only one dimension. Do you know what does the fund do? Do you know what will the fund not do? There is a 3-minute video that is there on our website. Even if you Google for it, you'll get it. There are some do's and don'ts of that fund. It also says when will this fund underperform. So the drivers of the fund, which has made it do well in the last 1 year, could actually become the reason for the fund not to do well in the next 1 year. And then you will feel disappointed. So do you believe in its very tightly defined rules of do's and don'ts? Because the don'ts will also give you underperformance at some point in time. That time you should not feel cheated that the fund did not deliver. Because the fund is not wrong, your selection process is wrong. So look for the technique, look for the method. So he said, no, but with that video, I know it came, with 3-minute video, kaun dekhta hai, wo thoda boring hai. So I said, we understand that we are boring people. We want to try and make our communication interesting. But some things cannot be glamorized. You can't make movies out of every, financial metric. So spend 3 minutes to know that. Don't take shortcuts of just seeing returns and, So point I'm making is that try to make yourself a star investor by analyzing the philosophy and the process and the do's and don'ts. And lastly, what I would add is that historically, I would always look at ये fund ने कितना return दिया. Now I've started looking at ये fund ने जब टाइम खराब था, जब फंड ने गलती किया या जब बाजार ने गलती किया तो कितना रिटर्न नहीं मिला. What was the worst case return? So that's another thing that I look for. That what can be that period of time when this fund can give me negative return. Or see, remember, every fund will give negative returns. If anyone is expecting equity funds don't give negative return, that's a big myth. Investors need to know that because markets fall, funds will also fall. So it's important to see that what is that period of time for which the fund could give no returns at all. Or what is the period of time for which the fund returns were lesser than fixed income. So if you take the best funds in India, whether from DSP or from any fund house, there will be patches of 3, 4, 5 years when returns would be less than fixed deposit. Those patches will come. You can't ignore them. You can't avoid them. But being aware of them can help you decide through some of the rules that I mentioned on valuations that, okay, now those patches are likely to come. So let me be more through asset allocation. But to at that point in time to feel cheated is not going to help you. So ask this question before investing that. So let me assume that I want to invest in ABC fund or DSP. I will look at its long-term history of 20 years and say that when did this fund give negative returns? How often? How often for what stretch of time was its return suboptimal? Am I okay? Is my time horizon longer than that suboptimal period? So the suboptimal period was 4 years, but I'm fine because my tenure is 10 years. So this 4 years I will be able to navigate. I don't mind. But if my time horizon for this money is only 3 years, then I can get trapped. So look at time horizons of negative returns and then decide whether the fund is right for you or not. Don't do the simplistic way that, okay, if I have 3-year money, equity, 5-year money, more aggressive equity, that's again a wrong way of looking at things. Look for the worst phases of returns and they can last really long. I have always, got this message stuck in my mind that in Japan, how would Japanese investors will be reacting? Where for 40 years they've made no money. So imagine the challenge that you put money and you don't make money. So be aware of what can go wrong. And I always look for what can go wrong first, apart from what can go right next. So that's another important dimension to keep in mind.
Sure. So Kalpan, on to the last question, and this is not really about mistakes, but overall philosophy. Now, in our past interactions, you've always mentioned that you want to differentiate DSP mutual fund by putting these lessons to life, in form of end products and experiences that you want to deliver to investors. Anything on these lines you like to share with ET Money users that you're doing currently at DSP Mutual Fund?
Yeah, I think these are things that should be a given for us because it is our fiduciary responsibility to guide investors and help them take care of their hard-earned money. So what we are doing is nothing special. I think it's something which is our responsibility, and we take it very seriously. A few examples of this is ideas like the quant fund, for example, very well defined, very well defined do's and don'ts. So it's an answer. It's an alternative to passive investing. So a lot of us have started investing in passive funds like Nifty and Nifty Next. So DSP has these funds also, but we've added one more layer, which is the quant fund, which says that okay, from the index, eliminate companies which generally permanently don't create value. So just focus on elimination. So everything that I spoke of from a mistake point of view, most mistakes can be avoided by elimination. So we've tried to apply these, principles even in product design. So quant fund starts by eliminating companies first. So there are some rules of elimination, and those rules straight away eliminate 110 companies out of the BSE 200. And then what's left is 90 companies, and then each company is given a score and the portfolio is designed. So that's one, manifestation of our intent to become more rules driven. So when I tell our investors that you become rules driven, we have to also walk the talk and become more rules driven. So there is a complete product idea which is rules driven. Then we preach about asset allocation. So we have very seriously worked on our dynamic asset allocation fund, which is again an asset allocation done around rules. So that fund increases equity to exposure when we believe margin of safety is in its favor, and reduces exposure to equity when we believe that most of the returns have played out, so that the volatility is lesser than the volatility of equity as an asset class. And over a long period of time, it should attempt to give returns in line with what that asset class gives. So again, very transparently we've laid out the asset allocation principles. I think the most important thing, and thanks for asking this question, Rajat, is our desire to articulate, write down, and communicate our investment philosophy with evidence. So we've actually written down 2 documents of 12 pages and 15 pages, which are our investment frameworks for funds managed by 2 senior portfolio managers. One is Vineet and one is Atul. Rohit's framework is still work in progress. We've been trying for quite some time, but we are not happy with what we have in hand right now, but we'll very shortly put it. So they're very well documented. Now, a lot of people tell me that हाँ ये बहुत अच्छा framework है. The point is not कि framework अच्छा लगा कि नहीं, कि क्या सीखा उसमें से. So it's not just about good English that we like good companies. No one will say we like bad companies, but it defines what are good companies. It defines our approach to what are good companies. Also, good companies are very expensive. They are not cheap. So they don't fulfill the second principle of good investing, which is don't overpay. In today's environment, unfortunately, most good companies are very expensive. Their valuations are much higher than what they've been in the last 2 decades. And that could be a source of risk. So while the business models are solid, but the price we are paying could be a source of risk. So we have also written that how do we, encounter this challenge? that the companies we love are also very expensive, but how do we really calibrate that? So we have leeway of around 1/3 of the portfolio to have some deviation. So we've tried to write our core principles, and I would love it if investors spend time reading some of these documents. We try to write it in as simple language as we can. Fourth, we ourselves show risk upfront. So whenever we do product communication, like when we restarted the small cap fund after a phase of 3-4 years of keeping it shut, after the NAVs had fallen by 35-40%, our first message was minus 67%. This is the worst case return you could have made in this fund in its history of 14 years. So the idea was to say that small caps have higher risk than Nifty because they fluctuate a lot more. And once in 10 years, such an event happens. Of course, in the next year, it recovered the entire loss and delivered 100% plus returns. But if an investor is not aware of these type of downsides, then he can come in at the wrong time in the wrong fund. It may not be the right fund for him. So we continue to learn every day from the environment around us, from good practices around us, and we would love to keep applying these practices to our business of helping investors become more successful.
So with this, we've come to the end of the live session. Kalpen, thank you so much for taking out time and talking to us.